1994, for me, I received a call that my dad had just hours left to live. We only had a 6-week window when we heard he had cancer to when I get that call that he has just hours. You better get here. We lived in Atlantic at the time. He lived in Mason City, so whatever that was, 4.5 hours or so of driving. So some 4 hours later, we get there, and by then he's unconscious, and he's breathing, labored. And the room is dark. It's early in the morning, actually, like in the middle of the night type hours. And I'm with my brothers in his room, and it's just a darkened room, a little light on a nightstand, and we're just watching him, leave. And he breathes his last breath, and we're kind of they're staring at him and just looking at him like, my dad just died, And I'm looking at my brothers, and they kind of have that same look, and we're looking back and forth, and it's just pretty intense set of emotions you go through. The next few days, as any of you have been through this with a loved one, is just an intense roller coaster, going to the funeral home, making arrangements, and he had already pre-planned a lot of things, but still got to go and do things, right? And traveling back and forth to Atlanta to get supplies and children or a child at the time, and clothes and all the stuff, the visitation and all of that is, as much as you're so grateful for all the people that come, it is exhausting, right? I mean, it's just totally exhausting, a couple, 3 hours that you go through. And then the funeral itself. And I'm sitting there at the funeral, and I'm thinking, at that point, as sad as this situation was, right? As sad as it was watching my dad die, and the couple, 3 days of processing, I'm sitting at the funeral, I had not yet shed a tear. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, then I'm starting to wonder, like, what is wrong with me? It's not like I wasn't sad. It wasn't like it didn't affect me. Why in the world hadn't I shed a tear yet, Even Jesus wept. That's like that famous verse. Everybody knows that verse. Jesus wept. He and his friends, Mary and Martha, had contacted him, told him about their friend Lazarus, who Jesus was like friends with all three of them, the brothers and sisters. Not like just like acquaintances or people in the crowd. He was friends with them, right? So they had a relationship. And Mary and Martha contact Jesus about their brother Lazarus. They know it's bigger than the flu. They knew something's big, so they're like, we better contact Jesus. We've seen him do some pretty big things and heal people and take care of people. And they call on Jesus, hoping he'll do something. If anything, he's like my friend, right? Surely I'm going to get some favor in this thing. And when Jesus hears word, he says in John 11:4, this illness does not lead to death. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, I'm thinking, especially considering what we'll read in the conversations coming up between Jesus and Mary and Martha, they're probably like all of us. They hear what they want to hear, right? They heard the first part. This illness does not lead in death. They're like, oh, yes! And of course, they didn't know what the whole rest of the sentence meant. Well, it's for the glory of God, the Son of God may be glorified. Okay, great. But all they heard was, Lazarus is not going to die. This is good news. And then there's a twist in the story. Verse 5 and 6, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Whatever happened to Jesus is really good friends with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So when he found out Lazarus was sick, he dropped everything and left. What happened to that? That's what I would expect if I was Mary and Martha. If I was Lazarus, that's what I'm going. But Jesus hears Lazarus is sick, and he stays another couple days where he's at. And then he tells the disciples, all right, it's time to go. Let's go see Mary and Martha. And he tells the disciples, oh, by the way, Lazarus has fallen asleep. And the disciples are like, well, that's good, because he's sick. He needs some sleep. That's good for you. He goes, no. He's asleep. he's dead. And they're like, well, wait a minute, why are we going back there anyway? Last time we went there, they tried to kill you. This is a bad time to go. He's gone, And he's like, no, we're going to go. Verse 17 says, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, that's a big deal in their culture. It's a big deal to us, but it's a really big deal there. For some reason, there is a common impression, idea that the spirit lingered around a body for 3 days. And so by the fourth day, it's just gone. I don't know if you've ever been in the room with someone who's passed away, but like when I was sitting there in that room with my dad, I remember we were like going, was he like his body? I mean, he's like gone, but it's like, is he here? It was just kind of like this. I didn't know what to think, Well, the common thought was the spirit hung around for 3 days. And I don't know if because they had people who would go into comas and wake up a couple days later and they just figured out, hey, 3 must be the magic number. Whatever reason, that's what culture decided. So Lazarus was dead. He'd been embalmed. He'd gone through the burial process for their culture. He'd been in the tomb for 4 days now. Now, in their culture, dry, very hot. His body is already seeing some decomposition. Matter of fact, if you're a King James person, that uses the word "he stinketh," right? How often do you get to say that, right? So I had to bring that up. His body's not in good shape, right? I mean, he has gone, he has died, and his body stinketh, according to the good King. There's no coming back, right? There's no, oh, he was in a coma, it looks like he woke up, boy, that was neat. It was like, no, it's just, you just stay away, right? That's why they put rocks over the tombs, doesn't attract the animals, there's this big deal. So let's read what happens. John 11, verse 18, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Just pause to think about that for a moment. Isn't that a huge statement? My brother is dead, and he's been dead for 4 days, and he's buried. I know whatever. I think that just gives me pause right there. What a statement! What a statement! She understands. She gets who Jesus is. Jesus says to her in verse 23, "Your brother will rise again." She's thinking end times, right? Well, she said to him, "I know he'll rise again at the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? My brother's in the tomb, and I believe in you. I mean, she's like trying to process this, right? She said, "Yes, Lord, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world." Now, try to wrap your mind around this conversation, if you can, for a moment. I put myself back in 94 when my father passed away. If Jesus had walked into that room that night, moments after he had died, and said, "Here's the deal, Dan, I'm going to heal him of cancer, and we're going to bring him back from the dead," I would have been like, "Let's do this. This is good news." If he said it on day 2, it would have been a little bit creepy, but I would have been like, yeah, he's at the funeral home. Whatever has happened. If you can conquer death, you can conquer, whatever the process he is in there. If it was 3 days at the funeral, I'm not sure what I would have known, what to think, but I would have been like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do this. If it was day 4, and he was buried, and we'd had the funeral, and at the funeral dinner, or hanging out with family, I would have been like, dude, you're too late. It's done. It's a done deal. This isn't good. No, don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. But Jesus has this conversation with Martha, and Martha runs off and tells Mary, who then runs out of the house to meet Jesus, and they have family and friends hanging out because they usually grieved for a few days and had people wailing loudly and musicians. It was a big deal. It wasn't like a half-hour thing. And they all take off too to be a comfort to Mary and Martha, and they all meet together at the place where Jesus and Martha had been talking earlier. And it says in verse 32, "Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, 'Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come with her also weeping, he was deeply, deeply moved to his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, 'Where have you laid him?' They said to him, 'Lord, come and see.' And there's Jesus wept." He has observed everything that's going on. He begins weeping himself. And so the Jews, all the friends, the family, the relatives, the people that are around, they're like, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Well, hey, couldn't he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Well, I thought they were friends. I thought they were friends. You ever had someone say, why didn't God answer your prayer? That's kind of what they're saying here, too. There's so much going on here. Mary and Martha, they're sobbing. The crowd is weeping. Jesus is affected by their grief. He weeps too. It goes on in verse 38. Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Hey, Dan, dig up the grave. Like, what? Serious? Martha and the sister of the dead man said, Lord, by this time there'd be an odor. He stinketh, King James. For he had been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you if you believed, you'd see the glory of God? They're like, okay. Roll away the stone. So they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me, and I knew you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, people like you and I, right? People standing around the crowd, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth, that's his burial clothes, right? And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Now, honestly, it's hard to read this story and not get a little bit emotional. Because this isn't just a story about some dude a couple thousand years ago who died and came back to talk about it. This is our story, right? This is our story. This is the story of us. This is the story of our friends. This is the story of our family who are Christ followers. Now, there will be weeping at your funeral, I assume. You're not that bad of a person, right? I mean, you know. They'll weep over you. There'll be flowers at the grave and at the cemetery. But the day is going to come when Jesus himself, Scripture says, will descend from heaven, and a loud cry and a voice from the archangel and the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise, Scripture says. See, this is my story. This is your story if you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Our family went through just an intensely crazy year a few years ago. It's been I should have looked it up. It's a few years ago now. It all ebbs together in my head after a while. But there were like 13 close friends and relatives who died that year. I mean, it was an intense year for us. Relatives, Cheryl's grandparents, Pat's parents, both of them within a month of each other. Very close friends in ministry, people who we just loved these people. Like every month there was another person dying. Right? It was a crazy year. It was an intense year. It's actually taken us a while to even get over that year because it was just so awful. But you know what? This is their story too. It just also happens that every one of them were Christ followers who died that year. So as much as there was sadness and there was grief and there was hurt and there was pain, there was also this, we'll see them again. They're not done. They're going to be fine. So yeah, there was sadness. Yeah, there was pain. Yeah, there was deep grief. But there was also Jesus. And that's the ingredient that always changes the story. That he makes all the difference. I think there's three big, there's probably more, but there's three big takeaways I want to take from this story today of Lazarus coming back from the grave, from the dead, and everything that Jesus had in this story. The first thing is that even with the absolute right perspective, we're still going to have moments of sadness. All right? So don't think if you're a believer like, oh, I should never be sad, I should never have a blue day, I should never be down. No, you can have the completely correct perspective at all times and still have moments of sadness. Mary and Martha believed in Jesus. They believed in the resurrection. He'd been buried 4 days, and Martha's like, well, I believe you can do whatever you want. But there was still some sadness. There was weeping. They wept and they grieved. Jesus knew exactly what was going on. He purposely waited before coming. He wanted Lazarus to die. He told them ahead of time, his disciples, this is going to end in my glory. This is the God moment here. So let's hang out here. Now he's dead. Now he's dead 4 days. He knew exactly what was going on. It was purposeful in what he was doing, but he still wept when he saw the deep anguish on the hearts of Mary and Martha and the family and friends who had gathered. It affected him deeply, and he wept. It's okay to be sad once in a while. I mean, that's just natural. It's who we are. It's how God designed us. It's natural to have tears. It's healthy to let your emotions pour out sometimes. And that's why it was shocking to me when I'm sitting there in my dad's funeral, who had been gone for days now, 3 days, and I still hadn't shed a tear. Like, what is wrong with you, guy? I'm thinking this in the funeral service. Like, I mean, then I'm questioning everything about my relationship with my dad and everything, right? And then right before, some of you have heard this, right before it was my turn to speak at the funeral, suddenly they play the Air Force song on the piano. He had rearranged that would happen, and this flood of memories came back. Like really it would have been like 4 or 5 days earlier, he'd given me this ring, his Air Force ring, which I wear all the time now. People always say, you have a class ring? Now it's my dad's Air Force ring, right? He'd give me this, and I had this flashback. He used to sit at the table and make his hand an airplane and sing the Air Force. He just was goofy. I don't know where I got it from. And he just would break out in song once in a while and do the Air Force song, and all of a sudden, all that came to me, and then would then not let loose. And I'm like, are you serious? I've got to speak now. And I'm going up there, Will. And he didn't stop. I don't know how long it lasted. I remember driving in the hearse or to the limo to the, it was just leaking for like hours, and it just never stopped. So at least I was glad I was human. I was glad that I could grieve in that physical way. But part of me was a little ticked off too because of the timing of it. I thought, Dad, you did this. You did it on purpose, right? For whatever reason, I'm talking about sadness, right, and pain and grief. This morning, the song pops in my head. If you're friends with me on Facebook, I posted it so you can actually hear the song. Brian Duncan, sung this back in the 90s. He released it, I think it was 91. My dad died in 94. But we had like a rough patch there. Lost a couple of babies. There was some ministry things going on that were pretty difficult. Life was pretty rough. And this album came out by Brian Duncan. Here's some of the words. One of the songs was "Blessed Are the Tears," and I'm not like Mr. Emotional guy generally, but man, I listened to this thing. I wore the thing out practically on this song. Here's some of the words. Think of all the times you've fallen victim, all the restless nights you've wrestled through, the closest of your friends abandoned, helpless. They're just not reaching you. You hold no valid thoughts of consolation. The future holds no interest, no concern. The world you love is closing in around you. Clearly now, there's nowhere left to turn. Just this despondent thing, right? Then it goes to the chorus, blessed are the tears that fall, clean the windows of the soul, and usher in a change of heart, and bring a joy that angels know. A time has come to share your well-kept secrets, the hatred and guilt degrading you. I'm sure you blame yourself for all that's happened. This time, there's just no way that's true. You need to know you've got a friend in Jesus. You need to know he felt rejected too. Humiliating pain and unjust treatment. He's been there, so he knows what you've been through. And God will send a merciful peacemaker, comforter of all those who mourn. He'll become the pure in heart, the earthly meek, enduring misdirected scorn. Blessed are the tears that fall. They clean the window of the soul and usher in a change of heart and bring joy that angels know. Blessed are the tears that fall. They wash the stains of life away. Forgiven and forgotten now. A new creation's here to stay. See, sadness isn't a sign of like you doing something wrong or God coming to get you or anything like that. It actually could be a sign that you're doing things right. You grieve deeply because you love deeply. The loss of a friend, of a relative, of someone close hurts so much because you love them so much. We hurt in a betrayal because we trusted someone so freely. We mourn someone's loss of morality and poor choices because we care about their eternity. Sometimes you do things right and it still leads to sadness. The right perspective sometimes just puts us in that sadness. And the second takeaway from this story is when you get there, it's okay to tell Jesus how you're feeling. For one thing, he knows. You're not going to surprise him. But it's okay to say, Jesus, man, what's going on? Mary and Martha both questioned Jesus. Man, if you were, we told you. If you would have just come, Lazarus wouldn't have died. They're just being honest with him. The friends question, hey man, he could heal the blind man. Why didn't he heal Lazarus? What's wrong with that? These are honest, legitimate questions. Why didn't God heal my dad of cancer? I don't have an answer for that. Why didn't he heal my mom just a few years ago when we asked? Why have some of my friends gone through some very hard times? We prayed for marriages and tumors and jobs and families and all kinds of different issues out there. Many have been answered with God saying, yeah, I'm here. And other times, he just doesn't show up, kind of like with Lazarus. He's not there, we assume. It's okay to ask God those questions when you're going through the hard time. He knows. He already knows. And he may not answer. He vaguely answered Mary and Martha. It was more like, I'll let my actions speak. He didn't even bother to answer the crowd. He acted, but it turned out okay. And sometimes it's just our faith, we'll ask the questions and just be okay not getting the answer. That's just a faith thing. So I would encourage you, when you go through those moments, go ahead and let God know what you're feeling. You don't fake it. Don't put on a mask when God, everything's great. I'm supposed to have joy, right? Just be real. Just be real. He knows what you're going through. But do it respectfully. He is still God. He is still sovereign. In Romans 8, right after Paul is talking about the perspective of pain, like, man, if you consider the glory of heaven, it's nothing. I mean, what we're going through is nothing compared to heaven. We talked about that like not that long ago. Right after he says that, he says something interesting in Romans chapter 8, verse 26. Sometimes you can be so down you don't even know what to say. And he says, that's okay. The Spirit intercedes. The Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. He who searches hearts knows it is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Sometimes you can get so low, you just are silent before him and let the Spirit just kind of intercede for you and let him speak. But it's okay. It's okay to have the honest conversation. And the third takeaway here is to be confident that Jesus will ultimately help you through the issue. Now, I'm going to be honest, it probably won't be as fantastic as opening up a grave that's been sealed for 4 days and bringing someone back, when it comes to whatever has caused your sadness. But throughout Scripture, over and over again, time and time again, he says, bring your anxiety to me, bring your pain to me, bring your tears to me, bring your sadness to me, because he cares. So let him be your anchor. Let him be your rock. Now, I can't really say I planned it this way, but it seems like the last few months, every series we've done has had this sadness theme in it. I mean, this is like an obvious emotion that's in this. We talked about it when we were doing some earlier in the year, the evidence of the faith that it came through then. It's coming through in Philippians that we'll come back to later, because that's what they were dealing with. I can't say that I really planned to make that like a theme of the last few months, but it seems like it's come out a lot. And honestly, I don't want to dwell on the downside of this. I'd much rather dwell on the Jesus side of this and the healing side of this, the part where God reaches into our soul and touches us and heals us and helps us take that next step. So the rest of this morning, what we're going to do, we're going to sing. It's going to be about worship. It's going to be about taking the pain of life, if you're in that moment now, and giving it to Jesus, or it could be just a matter of preparing yourself for whatever comes next, just to put yourself in the presence of worship and praise before God. But let's worship through this.